Welcome to BoxPred. Thank you for joining me. Okay, so let's talk about the fight that's happening this weekend for the WBC World Lightweight title. It sees Devin Haney going up against Joseph Diaz. I really like this fight. Haney is 26-0 unbeaten with 15 stoppages to his name. He's an orthodox fighter. Joseph Jojo Diaz is 32 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. 15 stoppages to his name, and he is a southpaw. Devin Haney has the height and reach advantage in this fight. I think he's got a couple of inches of height and several inches of reach advantage over Diaz, and that may come into play in this fight. Let's look at Haney first. He's the young guy on his come up. Okay, he's on his journey, building his career, building his record. You can argue, is not at his peak yet. He's still learning in the ring. He's got those 26 fights unbeaten. He's been very impressive. He shows many of the skills you'd look for in a young fighter. He has really good movement, really good variety of punches, quick hands. His lateral movement in terms of his footwork is exquisite at times. He throws clean punches, so he scores really well. He has a lot of energy. He's a very high volume fighter, and I actually quite like the way that Haney's been managed in his career thus far, because I think there's a good balance of outcomes to his fights. I like the balance he has between stoppages and going the full distance. I think if you look coming through, he had a couple of 10-rounders which took him the distance, and he's had quite a few of his 12-rounders that have taken him the distance as well. So he's been fighting guys who, while they will not be top level, they will be guys who have taken him the distance and have given him some sort of test and something to think about. And yes, he's looked really good throughout his career thus far, but I think that this is another good fight, really good fight to be put in, because you really want to be testing fighters. You don't want to leave them at the same level. Another fight that's happening this weekend that I've already covered, the Lyndon Arthur against Anthony Yarde fight. We can speak about Yarde not having the right management in terms of his progression through his fights. He's just fought at the same level, and that's bitten him really, because he's been stopping guys too early and not getting the experience. He's not being tested, so the first guy you put him in there that gives him a bit of a test, he's not really sure how to cope with it. Devin Haney, on the other hand, just looking at his last 3 fights, he was in there with Yuriorkis Gamboa. Okay, Gamboa may be over the hill, he's been hurt and stopped, but he's able to provide that upper level of test, that energy that Haney would have to learn to deal with. And sometimes you've got to take a risk. So in his last fight, he fought against Jorge Linares. One thing Linares always brings is technique. He throws good combinations, he throws nice crisp punches, and he gave Haney some things to think about. Look at the end of the 10th against Linares in his last fight. Haney was hurt, he was wobbling towards his corner. Linares landed a couple of really good shots. So Haney will take that experience and he will learn from it. And he was able to come through adversity against Linares, and I like to see that in a fighter, especially when they're building their career. What is Haney now? He's 23. I like to see them building these experiences as they go through, not just stopping guys, knocking them out, or coming through really easy wins, but actually being tested. And I think going from a guy like Jorge Linares, who some would say is, again, they would say he's on the back end of his career, but he's been in there with top level guys, and he's been a top level guy himself. He still is a fantastic boxer. Now against Joseph Diaz, again, they're putting Haney in with another guy who is a risk. Here's a tough guy. He's only lost once, about 3 years ago, against Gary Russell Jr. He's a tough guy. He's durable. He's been in there with other good guys, and he's come through it. And he's shown that he can, not only is he durable and tough and high volume fighter, but he's also an able boxer. He's not a guy who isn't able to box with you. He might not be on the level of Haney in terms of technique and movement and boxing ability, but he's good enough to make you think and to provide you with a test. He does have movement. He doesn't just come in just in straight lines. He's got a bit of head movement, a bit of movement at the waist. And Diaz has some experience to bring into the ring. Back in 2020 for Tevin Farmer, decent boxer, decent mover, and Diaz was able to bring high volume to him. He was able to get on the inside, bring the fight in quite close. And the thing with Diaz, he throws a good variety of punches also. He throws body shots. He loves to go to the body, so he's going to be risky there. He throws good punches in bunches, so he's not just throwing ones and twos all the time. If he has some success, he'll keep throwing, so you can't just rest on your laurels. He will come with 4-punch, 5-punch combinations. He'll throw uppercuts. So Diaz is a guy who is going to provide you with a test. He's not been stopped. He's been in some really almost wars, some of these fights he's been in, really high volume. And that's the thing with Diaz. Haney's not going to be able to just sit back and relax. He's going to have to bring his usual high volume, because Diaz will try and push the pace, and he will keep that high volume up, meaning that Haney needs to keep his volume up to remain active in the eyes of the judges, okay? So I'm expecting a competitive fight here, right? I'm expecting a really good, enjoyable fight. I think that Haney, to begin with, needs to try and keep the fight at some distance, because with Diaz, I think he'll have more success if he's coming in from distance, getting in and out. But also, Diaz has this knack of bringing guys into a close quarters fight. I don't think Diaz really wants to stay too much at mid-range with Haney, because Haney does like to measure you and then come in with some explosive combinations, which can be quite dangerous. We had a fight last week, Brandon Figueroa against Stephen Fulton, and Fulton came out on top in that fight. But again, Fulton was drawn into a toe-to-toe battle with Figueroa, which is where Figueroa wanted it to be, and therefore it made that fight closer. And I'm kind of expecting a similar thing with this, for Jojo Diaz to bring the fight to a close quarters encounter, to start throwing some nice hook combinations, some nice body shots. What I'm expecting from Haney is to try and maintain a bit of distance, to try and get some of those crisp, clean punches in, those all-important point-scoring punches, and then slip back out to keep away from counters. One thing I like with Diaz is that he covers up really well with his gloves. I like to see that, because nowadays you've got a lot of fighters, like Haney for example, who don't always cover themselves up properly and leave themselves open, and they rely more on a reflex defence. Diaz is more of a traditional defence. He has no shame in keeping his guard up, blocking shots the conventional way with the gloves. But what I've noticed is, if you put volume on him, he will cover up if you put some combinations against him from the outside. Therefore, he doesn't always counter. So Haney could put some nice combinations on him, make him cover up, score some points, and then get back out. That's the ideal scenario for Haney in this one for me. If he can do that from the start, and I think it's important to do that from the start, for the first half of the fight, if he can, that will give him an advantage on the scorecards, and I think that's where he'll start building the points, and try and get out of touching distance of Diaz. The things with Diaz, I think, as this fight goes on, inevitably stamina becomes into play, and then the mover of the two tends to slow down. The key for Haney here, I think, is to do his clean work early, get those point scores in, start fast. He can't afford to straight away let Diaz dictate distance and get drawn into a messy war where the judges might be seeing punches all over the shop, because these are both high volume guys, remember, and then you're letting Diaz get into the fight, and Diaz will take you into the trenches and he'll war it out with you for 12 rounds, and then it becomes a bit messy. Then you're at a risk that Diaz is going to beat you on the scorecards, okay, like he's done last time out against Javier Fortuna. Broad Fortuna. Fortuna's a decent mover, decent distance guy, but against Diaz was able again to bring him inside, get things close, get things messy, let things come into his camp, get into his control. So Haney needs to look out for that. He needs to really try and use the jab, keep the distance, use his movement, lateral movement preferably, and we need to see that distance fighting that we know Haney can do. A lot of movement, a lot of slipping, a lot of countering. An important thing I want to mention as well for Haney in this one is I really don't want to see him, like he did against Gamboa a couple of fights ago, looking for the KO. Okay, I don't want to see him putting in single shots, single hooks from range, trying to stop Diaz, trying to catch him with a wonder punch. Because you never say never, but that's not the type of thing that works against Diaz, because he covers up well, his defence is okay, and you're not going to be keeping him in his shell like that. You're going to be just inviting pressure. He needs to have patience, throw the jab, hit with combinations, and, as I said, keep Diaz behind the gloves for as long as he can. What I'd say with Diaz, play your usual game. Draw on your experience and just do what you do. If he fights his game plan and he draws Haney in, that will be where he wants to be. And then it's going to be on experience, because what you see is usually experience comes into play when fighters are close up. You know, when Lomachenko lost to Orlando Salido, Salido used all his experience and the dirty tricks and the tactics to make that fight a messy fight, and he ends up getting the scores. Yeah, That's what Diaz can do in this one. I'm going to go for Devin Haney to win this fight by decision. I think he's going to come through some adversity again, potentially, and it's going to be another good experiential fight for him. He'll learn some more to take into his next fights. I think size and the height and reach advantage will play into Haney's hands. I think if he uses that height and reach, he can keep the distance for as long as he can, and I think that will allow him to build up some points. But he has to be sharp and start quick, okay? Let me know what you guys think. I think this is a tremendous fight. I think Diaz has the potential to cause real trouble here, and certainly has a good chance to win the fight. I think it goes the distance. Looking at Haney's recent fights, he's had his last, 3 fights have gone the distance, all 12 rounders, and I think this one, no different. Sorry, I forgot to mention something. Diaz has a recent history of left eye cuts. It was against Farmer. He got a really bad cut on his left eyelid. Really bad cut. I mean, if it had been any more, I think his eyelid would have been hanging off. And then in his last fight against Fortuna, he also suffered a cut, but I think that was under the left eye. So his left eye is vulnerable, okay? Haney could target that. Another thing I forgot to mention, Diaz is a southpaw. The problem with Diaz is, because of his style of fighting, because he prefers to be on the front foot, does tend to square up a little bit, so may expose that left side a bit. Just something minor, but it could come into play. But when it has cut before, pretty badly, Diaz has been able to come through it and fight pretty well, okay? So just thought I'd mention that. This one's been a long one, but I really, I'm excited by this fight, and I wanted to cover everything in detail. It's a world title fight in a really strong division, the lightweight division. Do you think Diaz can cause the upset here? We saw last week, Teofimo Lopez losing to Kambosos. Does Diaz bring similar here? Is he able to upset the Albuquerque? Can he be the roadblock here in front of Devin Haney? Enjoy the fight, guys. Until next time, this is BoxPred.